Chapter 33. Martin was steadily losing his battle. Economize as he would, the earnings from hack work did not balance expenses. Thanksgiving found him with his black suit in pawn, and unable to accept the Morses' invitation to dinner. Ruth was not made happy by his reason for not coming, and the corresponding effect on him was one of desperation. He told her that he would come, after all, that he would go over to San Francisco, to the Transcontinental office, collect the $5 due him, and with it redeem his suit of clothes. In the morning he borrowed 10 cents from Maria. He would have borrowed it, by preference, from Brissenden, but that erratic individual had disappeared. 2 weeks had passed since Martin had seen him, and he vainly cudgelled his brains for some cause of offense. 10 cents carried Martin across the ferry to San Francisco, and as he walked up Market Street, he speculated upon his predicament in case he failed to collect the money. Then there would be no way for him to return to Oakland, and he knew no one in San Francisco from whom to borrow another 10 cents. The door to the Transcontinental office was ajar, and Martin, in the act of opening it, was brought to a sudden pause by a loud voice from within, which exclaimed, "But that is not the question, Mr. Ford." Ford, Martin knew from his correspondence, to be the editor's name. "The question is, are you prepared to pay, cash, and cash down, I mean? I am not interested in the prospects of the Transcontinental, and what you expect to make it next year. What I want is to be paid for what I do, and I tell you right now, the Christmas Transcontinental won't go to press till I have the money in my hand. Good day. When you get the money, come and see me." The door jerked open, and the man flung past Martin with an angry countenance, and went down the corridor, muttering curses and clenching his fists. Martin decided not to enter immediately, and lingered in the hallways for a quarter of an hour. Then he shoved the door open and walked in. It was a new experience, the first time he had been inside an editorial office. Cards evidently were not necessary in that office, for the boy carried word to an inner room that there was a man who wanted to see Mr. Ford. Returning, the boy beckoned him from halfway across the room, and led him to the private office, the editorial sanctum. Martin's first impression was of the disorder and cluttered confusion of the room. Next he noticed a bewhiskered, youthful-looking man, sitting at a roll-top desk, who regarded him curiously. Martin marveled at the calm repose of his face. It was evident that the squabble with the printer had not affected his equanimity. "I am Martin Eden," Martin began the conversation, "and I want my $5, was what he would have liked to say. But this was his first editor, and under the circumstances he did not desire to scare him too abruptly. To his surprise, Mr. Ford leaped into the air with a "You don't say so!" and, the next moment, with both hands, was shaking Martin's hand effusively. "Can't say how glad I am to meet you, Mr. Eden. Often wondered what you were like." Here he held Martin off at arm's length, and ran his beaming eyes over Martin's second-best suit, which was also his worst suit, and which was ragged and past repair, though the trousers showed the careful crease he had put in with Maria's flat-irons. "I confess, though, I conceived you to be a much older man than you are. Your story, you know, showed such breadth and vigor, such maturity and depth of thought. A masterpiece, that story. I knew it when I had read the first dozen lines. Let me tell you how I first read it. But no, first let me introduce you to the staff." Still talking, Mr. Ford led him into the general office, where he introduced him to the associate editor, Mr. White, a slender, frail little man whose hand seemed strangely cold, as if he were suffering from a chill, and whose whiskers were sparse and silky. "And Mr. Innes, Mr. Eden. Mr. Innes is our business manager, you know." Martin found himself shaking hands with a cranky-eyed, bald-headed man, whose face looked youthful enough from what little could be seen of it, for most of it was covered by a snow-white beard, carefully trimmed, by his wife, who did it on Sundays, at which times she also shaved the back of his neck. The 3 men surrounded Martin, all talking admiringly and at once, until it seemed to him that they were talking against time for a wager. "We often wondered why you didn't call," Mr. White was saying. "I didn't have the car fare, and I live across the bay," Martin answered bluntly, with the idea of showing them his imperative need for the money. Surely, he thought to himself, my glad rags in themselves are eloquent advertisement of my need. Time and again, whenever opportunity offered, he hinted about the purpose of his business. But his admirers' ears were deaf. They sang his praises, told him what they had thought of his story at first sight, what they subsequently thought, and what their wives and families thought, but not one hint did they breathe of intention to pay him for it. "Did I tell you how I first read your story?" Mr. Ford said. "Of course I didn't. I was coming west from New York, and when the train stopped at Ogden, the train boy on the new run brought aboard the current number of the Transcontinental. My God, Martin thought, you can travel in a Pullman while I starve for the paltry $5 you owe me." A wave of anger rushed over him. The wrong done him by the Transcontinental loomed colossal, for strong upon him were all the dreary months of vain yearning, of hunger and privation, and his present hunger awoke and gnawed at him, reminding him that he had eaten nothing since the day before, and little enough then. For the moment he saw red. These creatures were not even robbers, they were sneak thieves. By lies and broken promises they had tricked him out of his story. Well, he would show them. And a great resolve surged into his will to the effect that he would not leave the office until he got his money. He remembered, if he did not get it, that there was no way for him to go back to Oakland. He controlled himself with an effort, but not before the wolfish expression on his face had awed and perturbed them. They became more voluble than ever. Mr. Ford started anew to tell him how he had first read The Ring of Bells, and Mr. Innes at the same time was striving to repeat his niece's appreciation of The Ring of Bells, said niece being a schoolteacher in Alameda. "I'll tell you what I came for," Martin finally said. "To be paid for that story all of you like so well. $5, I believe, is what you promised me would be paid on publication." Mr. Ford, with an expression on his mobile features of immediate and happy acquiescence, started to reach for his pocket, then suddenly turned to Mr. Innes, and said that he had left his money home. That Mr. Innes resented this was patent, and Martin saw the twitch of his arm as if to protect his trousers pocket. Martin knew that the money was there. "I am sorry," said Mr. Innes, "but I paid the printer not an hour ago, and he took my ready change. It was careless of me to be so short, but the bill was not yet due, and the printer's request as a favor to make an immediate advance was quite unexpected." Both men looked expectantly at Mr. White, but that gentleman laughed and shrugged his shoulders. His conscience was clean at any rate. He had come into the Transcontinental to learn magazine literature, instead of which he had principally learned finance. The Transcontinental owed him 4 months' salary, and he knew that the printer must be appeased before the associate editor. "It's rather absurd, Mr. Eden, to have caught us in this shape," Mr. Ford preambled airily. "All carelessness, I assure you. But I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll mail you a check the first thing in the morning. You have Mr. Eden's address, haven't you, Mr. Innes?" Yes, Mr. Innes had the address, and the check would be mailed the first thing in the morning. Martin's knowledge of banks and checks was hazy, but he could see no reason why they should not give him the check on this day just as well as on the next. "Then it is all understood, Mr. Eden, and we'll mail you the check tomorrow," Mr. Ford said. "I need the money today," Martin answered stolidly. "The unfortunate circumstances, if you had chanced here any other day," Mr. Ford began suavely, only to be interrupted by Mr. Innes, whose cranky eyes justified themselves in his shortness of temper. "Mr. Ford has already explained the situation," he said with asperity, "and so have I. The check will be mailed." "I also have explained," Martin broke in. "And I have explained that I want the money today." He had felt his pulse quicken a trifle at the business manager's brusqueness, and upon him he felt an alert eye, for it was in that gentleman's trousers pocket that he divined the Transcontinental's ready cash was reposing. "It is too bad," Mr. Ford began. But at that moment, with an impatient movement, Mr. Innes turned as if about to leave the room. At the same instant, Martin sprang for him, clutching him by the throat with one hand, in such fashion that Mr. Innes' snow-white beard, still maintaining its immaculate trimness, pointed ceilingward at an angle of 45 degrees. To the horror of Mr. White and Mr. Ford, they saw their business manager shaken like an astrakhan rug. "Dig up, you venerable discourager of rising young talent," Martin exhorted. "Dig up, or I'll shake it out of you, even if it's all in nickels." Then, to the two affrighted onlookers, "Keep away. If you interfere, somebody's liable to get hurt." Mr. Innes was choking, and it was not until the grip on his throat was eased that he was able to signify his acquiescence in the digging-up program. Altogether, after repeated digs, his trouser pockets yielded $4.15. "Inside out with it," Martin commanded. An additional 10 cents fell out. Martin counted the result of his raid a second time to make sure. "You next," he shouted at Mr. Ford. "I want 75 cents more." Mr. Ford did not wait, but ransacked his pockets, with the result of 60 cents. "Sure that is all?" Martin demanded menacingly, possessing himself of it. "What have you got in your vest pockets?" In token of his good faith, Mr. Ford turned two of his pockets inside out. A strip of cardboard fell to the floor from one of them. He recovered it, and was in the act of returning it, when Martin cried, "What's that, a ferry ticket? Here, give it to me. It's worth 10 cents. I'll credit you with it. I've now got $4.95, including the ticket. 5 cents is still due me." He looked fiercely at Mr. White, and found that fragile creature in the act of handing him a nickel. "Thank you," Martin said, addressing them collectively. "I wish you a good day." "Robber!" Mr. Innes snarled after him. "Sneak thief!" Martin retorted, slamming the door as he passed out. Martin was elated, so elated that when he recollected that the Hornet owed him $15 for the Peri and the Pearl, he decided forthwith to go and collect it. But the Hornet was run by a set of clean-shaven, strapping young men, frank buccaneers, who robbed everything and everybody, not excepting one another. After some breakage of the office furniture, the editor, an ex-college athlete, ably assisted by the business manager, an advertising agent, and the porter, succeeded in removing Martin from the office and in accelerating, by initial impulse, his descent of the first flight of stairs. "Come again, Mr. Eden. Glad to see you any time." They laughed down at him from the landing above. Martin grinned as he picked himself up. "Phew!" he murmured back. "The transcontinental crowd were nanny goats, but you fellows are a lot of prize fighters." More laughter greeted this. "I must say, Mr. Eden," the editor of the Hornet called down, "for a poet, you can go some yourself. Where did you learn that right cross, if I may ask?" "Where did you learn that half Nelson?" Martin answered. "Anyway, you're going to have a black eye. I hope your neck doesn't stiffen up." The editor wished, solicitously. "What do you say we all go out and have a drink on it? Not the neck, of course, but the little rough-house." "I'll go you if I lose." Martin accepted. The robbers and robbed drank together, amicably agreeing that the battle was to the strong, and that the $15 for the Peri and the Pearl belonged by right to the Hornet's editorial staff. End of chapter 33.